Scales, scales, scales. Welcome back to Sax Wizard, the channel dedicated to helping you become a better sax player. Today we're talking everything scales. We all know we should be practicing our scales more. Scales are important to know for so many different aspects of music, whether it's sight reading, improvising, or even writing and producing music. But how do we practice our scales in a way that's productive, efficient, and perhaps a bit more challenging? Well, today I'm going to break down 4 top tips to practice your scales like a pro. Let's get into it. Number 1, tempo. It's always really important to use a metronome when you practice your scales. This can be an old school physical metronome or just an app on your phone. There are hundreds of free metronome apps available that you can download. Personally, I use a free app called Sound Corset. The key here is to start slow, like really slow. The whole idea is to try and build that muscle memory, and the slower you play, the longer your brain has to make those mind-muscle connections. If you're practicing your scales making mistakes over and over again, then you'll be hardwiring your brain to play the wrong notes. Playing slow decreases the risk of this happening. When and only when you can play a scale perfectly at a slow speed, gradually increase the tempo little by little over the weeks and months. Of course, there's no harm in practicing your scales at a high tempo once you've mastered them at a slower speed. But I can't stress how important it is to play them slowly to start with, to build that correct muscle memory. Number 2, patterns. Playing scales linearly up and down is fine, but frankly it can be boring and not particularly very challenging. This is where patterns come in. If you want to take your scale practice to the next level, then you should be thinking about playing some different scale patterns. For example, instead of just playing straight up and straight down the scale, you could play the following pattern: up 2, down 1, up 2, down 1, etc. So the full pattern would look like this: 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6, 5, 6, 7, and 6, 7, 8. And you can simply reverse the pattern to come down the scale. Down 2, up 1, down 2, up 1, etc. Another example of a scale pattern is skip 1 up, down 1, skip 1 up, down 1, etc. So the full pattern would look like this. And again, reverse the pattern to come down the scale. Skip 1 down, up 1, skip 1 down, up 1, etc. I might make a separate video on this topic in the future, going into more detail and giving a few more examples of different scale patterns that you can play. But essentially, just pick a random pattern and then take it through all 12 keys. 3, range. We often play scales from the tonic to the tonic and back again, because this is how we're taught at school or when we do our early grades. So on a saxophone, we typically end up playing 1 or 2 octaves, but why stop there? Another way to make your scale practice a bit more interesting and challenging is to play over the full range of the saxophone, from low B flat to high F sharp. Take C major as an example. Traditional scale practice would involve playing from low C to high C over 2 octaves. However, the lowest note of a C major scale on a saxophone is B, or A if you're playing baritone. And the highest note, not counting the altissimo register, is a high F. So my suggestion would be to try playing your C major scale between low B and high F. This way you're playing over the entire range of the saxophone, and not just limiting yourself to 2 octaves. If you're feeling particularly adventurous, you can even extend your scale practice up into the altissimo register. Number 4, order. Okay, so if you've made it this far in the video, you should be playing your scales to a metronome, maybe trying out some different scale patterns, and perhaps playing over the full range of the saxophone. But what order do we actually practice our scales in? Now, it can be tempting to just get out our saxophone and play our scales in a completely random order. I know I certainly used to do this anyway. But usually when we do this, subconsciously we end up neglecting the scales that actually need work. And we end up playing the scales that we can already play. So how do we ensure that we give each scale an even playing time? Well, there are a few different options here, but they all essentially involved choosing a fixed interval and playing through all 12 keys using that interval. For example, you can play around the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths looks like this. If we move clockwise around the circle, we move in fifths. So C, G, D, A, E, etc. You can also play through your scales anti-clockwise around the circle in fourths, which is why it's sometimes called the circle of fourths. So that would be C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, etc. The good thing about playing around the circle of fifths or fourths is that only one note changes at a time. So it just feels like a very logical way to play through all 12 keys. If you want a bit more of a challenge, you can play through your scales chromatically. So that would look like this: C, D flat, D, E flat, E, F, etc. This is slightly more challenging because instead of one note, multiple notes are obviously changing when you play through your scales chromatically. Of course, you don't have to be restricted by the intervals that I've talked about in this video. You can pick any interval and play through all 12 keys using that fixed interval. Playing through your scales in different orders provides your brain with new challenges and ensures that those scales are really hardwired into your muscle memory. Okay, so in conclusion, 1, always use a metronome and start off really slow, building up the tempo gradually. 2, don't just play up and down your scales, try experimenting, playing some different scale patterns. 3, don't just limit yourself to 1 or 2 octaves, try playing over the full range of the saxophone. And 4, try playing through all 12 keys in a logical order using fixed intervals like fourths, fifths, or chromatically. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, then please drop me a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more videos like this one. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next one.